Hi, everybody. So, my bad on the video cutting off in the middle of our chapter 2 of part 3 there. Announcements broke off and then couldn't get back. So, we left off on page 256 towards the very end of chapter 2. And we're going to finish this out in this video, and then there'll be a separate video for chapter 3. So, we were about halfway through. Now, O'Brien is sort of giving Winston the business about what's happening to him with this torture, what's going on, and what is or is not going to be happening anymore after this. So he says, "Never again will you be capable of ordinary human feeling. Everything will be dead inside you. Never again will you be capable of love or friendship or joy of living or laughter or curiosity or courage or integrity. You will be hollow. We shall squeeze you empty, and then we shall fill you with ourselves." He paused and signed to the man in the white coat. Winston was aware of some heavy apparatus being pushed into place behind his head. O'Brien had sat down beside the bed so that his face was almost on a level with Winston's. 3,000, he said, speaking over Winston's head to the man in the white coat. Two soft pads, which felt slightly moist, clamped themselves against Winston's temples. He quailed. There was pain coming, a new kind of pain. O'Brien laid a hand reassuringly, almost kindly, on his. "This time it will not hurt," he said. "Keep your eyes fixed on mine." At this moment, there was a devastating explosion, or what seemed like an explosion, though it was not certain whether there was any noise. There was undoubtedly a blinding flash of light. Winston was not hurt, only prostrated. Although he had been lying on his back when the thing happened, he had a curious feeling that he'd been knocked into that position. A terrific, painless blow had flattened him out. Also, something had happened inside his head. As his eyes regained their focus, he remembered who he was and where he was and recognized the face that was gazing into his own. But somewhere or other, there was a large patch of emptiness, as though a piece had been taken out of his brain. "It will not last," said O'Brien. "Look me in the eyes. What country is Oceania at war with?" Because real quick with that, in past mental health treatments, very outdated and poor mental health treatments, they used to do what was called shock therapy. And so that's what has happened to him. He's had sort of the instrument attached to the sides of his head, and he's just gone through shock therapy. Winston thought. He knew what was meant by Oceania and that he himself was a citizen of Oceania. He also remembered Eurasia and East Asia, but who was at war with whom, he did not know. In fact, he had not been aware that there was any war. "I don't remember. Oceania is at war with East Asia. Do you remember that now?" "Yes." "Oceania has always been at war with East Asia. Since the beginning of your life. Since the beginning of the party. Since the beginning of history. The war has continued without a break. Always the same war. Do you remember that?" "Yes." 11 years ago, you created a legend about 3 men who'd been condemned to death for treachery. You pretended that you'd seen a piece of paper which proved them innocent. No such piece of paper ever existed. You invented it. And later you grew to believe in it. You remember now the very moment at which you first invented it. Do you remember that?" "Yes." "Just now I held up my fingers in my hand to you. You saw 5 fingers. Do you remember that?" "Yes." O'Brien held up the fingers of his left hand with the thumb concealed. "There are 5 fingers there. Do you see 5 fingers?" "Yes." And he did see them. For a fleeting instant before the scenery of his mind changed, he saw 5 fingers. And there was no deformity. Then everything was normal again, and the old fear, the hatred, and the bewilderment came crowding back again. But there had been a moment. He did not know how long, 30 seconds perhaps, of luminous certainty, when each new suggestion of O'Brien's had filled up a patch of emptiness and become absolute truth, and when 2 and 2 could have been 3 as easily as 5, if that were what was needed. It had faded out before O'Brien had dropped his hand, but though he could not recapture it, he could remember it. As one remembers a vivid experience at some remote period of one's life when one was, in effect, a different person. You see now, said O'Brien, that is at any rate possible. Yes, said Winston. O'Brien stood up satisfied. Over to his left, Winston saw the man in the white coat break an ampule and draw back the plunger of a syringe. O'Brien turned to Winston with a smile. In almost the old manner, he resettled his spectacles on his nose. Do you remember writing in your diary, he said, that it did not matter whether I was a friend or an enemy, since I was at least a person who understood you and could be talked to? You were right. I enjoy talking to you. Your mind appeals to me. It resembles my own mind, except that you happen to be insane. Before we bring this session to an end, you can ask me a few questions if you choose. Any question I like. Anything. He saw that Winston's eyes were upon the dial. It is switched off. What is your first question? What have you done with Julia? Said Winston. O'Brien smiled again. She betrayed you, Winston. Immediately, unreservedly. I've seldom seen anyone come over to us so promptly. You would hardly recognize her if you saw her. All her rebelliousness, her deceit, her folly, her dirty-mindedness, everything has been burned out of her. It was a perfect conversion, a textbook case. You tortured her? O'Brien left this unanswered. Next question, he said. Does Big Brother exist? Of course he exists. The party exists. Big Brother is the embodiment of the party. Does he exist in the same way I exist? You do not exist, said O'Brien. Once again, the sense of helplessness assailed him. He knew, or he could imagine, the arguments which proved his own non-existence, but they were nonsense. They were only play on words. Did not the statement, you do not exist, contain a logical absurdity? But what use was it to say so? His mind shriveled as he thought of the unanswerable, mad arguments with which O'Brien would demolish him. I think I exist, he said warily. I'm conscious of my own identity. I was born, I shall die. I have arms and legs. I occupy a particular point in space. No other solid object can occupy the same point simultaneously. In that sense, does Big Brother exist? It is of no importance. He exists. Will Big Brother ever die? Of course not. How could he die? Next question. Does the Brotherhood exist? That, Winston, you will never know. If we choose to set you free when we have finished with you, and if you live to be 90 years old, still you will never learn whether the answer to that question is yes or no. As long as you live, it will be an unsolved riddle in your mind. Winston lay silent. His breast rose and fell a little faster. He still had not asked the question that had come into his mind the first. He had got to ask it, and yet it was as though his tongue would not utter it. There was a trace of amusement in O'Brien's face. Even his spectacles seemed to wear an ironical gleam. He knows, thought Winston suddenly. He knows what I'm going to ask. At the thought, the words burst out of him. What is in room 101? The expression on O'Brien's face did not change. He answered dryly, You know what is in room 101, Winston. Everyone knows what's in room 101. He raised a finger to the man in the white coat. Evidently, the session was at an end. A needle jerked into Winston's arm. He sank almost instantly into deep sleep. Okay, so we've just seen Winston go through that ultimate, throughout the whole chapter, the ultimate torture and brainwashing to ensure that the party exists and remains existing. So one of the questions I want you to think about in your notes is, do you think the Brotherhood exists? So that's one of the final questions, one of them, that he asks is, does the Brotherhood exist? And do you think it exists? So if it does exist, how is it existing? And if it doesn't exist, what's the point of the government perpetuating the idea that it does exist going through? So make sure you wrap up your notes with chapter 2 and then continue on to chapter 3. As soon as I pause.